Well, good morning. Good to see you. I came across a photo I have to show you before we begin. It's an iconic image of our time. What you have here is Tiger Woods, and you'll notice the people photographing were not looking. So that almost none of them are looking at him directly, except for this fellow with a can of a drink or something. He's the only guy who's looking. They're all actually looking indirectly so that they can post it on Facebook and get likes. It's a strange thought. They are basically, that was your insight too. It's a strange thought that they are postponing or actually supposing that the future will make up for their present lack. So they're not living even in the now. They're not fully immediate, you see. It's now a mediated presence whereby they are now not able to, they're not even capable of doing it. You can imagine what would have happened during the Red Sea crossing. They would have been taking selfies. Just think about that. Oh, look at the waves. Make sure you see the two sides you see going up. It's incredible how thin our culture has become. And this, as I say, is an icon. But then I came across another photo, just had to show it to you. You'll get a kick out of this as well. This is a picture with me. I'm over here. This is years ago, as you can well imagine. Archie Wanamaker, Barry Morrow, who's now with the Lord, and his wife Carolita. But it looks like a record album. You know, because nobody's looking at each other. They're all looking at kind of a postured indifference. You know, a strange thought about that. So I just thought I'd share this stuff with you.
So what were you looking at?
I do not know. Ed Dudley was with us wrong one. I think that I don't know what had happened, but he caught it was obviously a candid shot, and we really weren't posing. And it just turned out that way, but it does look like a good record album, and not a good record album, but Mama and the Papa's good grief. That brings back memories. And now I wish you hadn't done that. I now have their songs in my head. You ever do that? You just can't get a song out of you. The only way I can do is replace it with a better song, because you can't get rid of it by extinction. You have to let me substitute something. But we're up to our 14th session on attributes of God, and I never expected this to go so long. And I've now made this promise to Lewis, and I have to keep it now. Next week will be my last one, so there'll be a 15-part series in the attributes of God. But it's so rich and profound to me that I've discovered things, as I shared this with you as well, that the standard lists of the attributes of God are these. And they're good, but then I'm now up to 42. There used to be 22, but now I have 42. So I keep adding more ones. And I threw this one in, Ministries. Why did I throw that one in? To indicate that there are things of God of which we know zero. Nothing. You don't have the capacity. He couldn't even convey that to you, even in a kind of a relative sense or a mediated sense. There are so many mysteries that are going to go on. And I have to tell you, as I've been exploring nature and preparing for this Museum of Beauty, this concept as well, I get moments where I'm actually terrified by the wonder. I know enough of the science to understand, wait, this can't be. And you just get overwhelmed. Whether it's on the microscopic dominion or the domain of the macroscopic or the world that we describe as the biosphere, it's becoming more amazing, not less, as I keep discovering things. So if this is true of a fallen creation mediated by people whose capacities are vastly diminished from what they were intended to be, and they are, you and I are not as we once were. We changed ourselves, and that's one of the most important principles in Scripture that is unique, one of the many uniquenesses. The Scriptures tell us that we are not as God made us. We're the ones who changed ourselves. So the doctrine of the fall is really quite unique. And it reveals that we have this diminished capacity, but wait till you see what's going to come. And that's my joy. And that's why I've been speaking a great deal more about this. And I would like to encourage you to see, we did a talk here, if you remember that. But there's a video of this, and you might want to revisit it on the website, because I am eager to get men to long for their heavenly home. That's my eagerness, my desire, my true heart for this. So do please consider viewing this. And I would encourage you to consider doing it with your bride if you're married. The reason for that, and Karen and I, in fact, we've talked through this a lot. We're talking more about home now than ever before, because that's what defines us, you see. And if you don't have an appetite, a longing, a desire to depart and be with Christ, because that's far better, as Paul makes it very clear, something's wrong, because we have an anemic aspiration, because we do not have a true imagination or an idea, a biblical vision of what God's prepared for those who love Him. So that's just become a growing motif in my own life journey. But as I consider these attributes of God now, we're going to be going on to two more of them, the love of God and the holiness of God. So last week, it's easy for me to show what I have done in the past, because you said I can go backwards, you see. And so this is how we've done it, you see. In our sequence here, these are the questions we had. And then I got lazy. And then I just started doing this, you see. But because it's hard to ask questions. How do you unpack this? So we've talked about so many aspects of the wonders of God. Of course, this is a key theme for you. Remember, we spent a session going on this. I do hope that you use this. I'm encouraging you to practice. Trust the Father, abide in the Son, walk by the Spirit. I have a habit, when I go through that portal in here, I always shoot that up. And I also, this morning, felt prompted to, He must increase and I must decrease, you see. And that is the path of downward mobility, because when I am weak, then He's strong. So I encourage you to use that and to consider when you're going to go to a meeting, or if you're going to be working on a project, that wouldn't be a bad thing to shoot up, would it? So, and we talked about the triunity of God and the self-existence of God, the self-sufficiency, God's eternity, His infinitude, teased out aspects of His immutability, which has become more and more for me a very comforting truth, that He does not change. And because He does not change, His promises are sure and steadfast, and therefore an anchor to the soul that really gives us a stability. My anchor holds. I remember there was a hymn by that. Remember that hymn? I haven't thought of that in years. I used to go to Emerson Bible Church, and it was an intellectual. I believed it, but I didn't know Jesus until I was at my senior year, or actually just when I graduated from college. So. But I still remember those hymns, but my anchor holds. And that's a good image, that we have a sure, steadfast hope. What are the implications of this? His omniscience, His omnipresence, and His omnipotence. For some reason, I don't know why, Tozer didn't put them in sequence, so I taught him out of his sequence. Because it's important to consider the omni-attributes and how they all tie together. So the more you learn about Him, the more you see this diversity, and the key being understanding that they're all one in Him, and His wisdom and His transcendence and the profound implications for that. What happened then is I didn't, in this session, you see, I have transcendence a second time, which means I only did the wisdom of God that time. So I had to go back to that. And then the goodness and justice of God, and now the mercy and grace of God last week, and now this is where we are, the love and holiness of God. So we're going to do that today. And then we have one more session. And then that's what my plans would be. I want to talk about the sovereignty of God, and then what Tozer calls the open secret, his last chapter. If you haven't been reading this, how many of you have been kind of looking at the Knowledge of the Holy by Tozer? Any of you? Several of you on that table, some over here. Quite more than I thought. This is a good table right here. Most of it, all of you have been doing that. What about you over there? No. But it really does reward careful reading. And I don't know how many times I've read the book, at least 6 times. There's some books, when you read them, if they're that good, you need to read them again and again. You see, you don't say, I read that, or I did this. you go back to it, and then you discover. One of the reasons why you do that, by the way, and the love of reading of great literature, is because you're a different person now than you were even a year ago. And as a consequence, you will be able to apprehend things in that material that you weren't able to see before. So the material was there, but you may not have been fully ready for it, and you see it in a new level. And that's really what happens. Same with a great book, of great literature. Same with film. There are a lot of films that are really worthy of praise, and that one, for example, Karen and I, we're about to see something, and then we happen to see something, The Madness of King George. We haven't seen that since it first came out, so we saw it again. It's even better than we remembered it. It was a great experience. So in doing that and sharing stories, of course, then you layer yourself. So let's talk about the love of God, and let's talk about the holiness of God. And so Tozer starts, as he always does in this book, with a prayer. And it's intriguing because it goes back to something he said earlier. My little note tells me to go here. Because he says way back earlier when he's chapter 3, at the end of chapter 3, love, for instance, is not something God has and which may grow or diminish or cease to be. No, that's the way he is. When he loves, he is simply being himself. And so with the other attributes. And I want you to remember that. When God is good, he's being himself. When he's holy, he's being himself. When he's sovereign, he's being himself. When he is just. And you can work your way through all the attributes. And even the ones that we find perhaps more difficult to embrace, they're still there, like the wrath of God. But remember, when God is showing wrath, and I'm going to make a comment about that as well, each of these others, because they're all one in him, each of these others, I see it amplifies them. So that's why I sometimes say, let's connect them together and see how they all relate together, you see. Because it's fascinating to see. So if I just did a study of the wrath of God and then compared that and related that then to how does that relate? The first thing that comes to my mind is the mercy of God. Why? In wrath, remember mercy. But then his truth also modifies his wrath. Each of these affects each other. But there's not a conflict, rather. There's a unity in that rich diversity. These are facets. And you could take any one of these facets. You could take the goodness of God, and you could spend multiple sessions on just that and teasing it out in Scripture and what it looks like, and you begin to see it. And so it is with the others. I put the transcendentals so that you have beauty, goodness, and truth in the same color. And I put the omni attributes, omniscience, omnipresence, and omnipotence in the same color. Just a little thing as a kind of a personal reminder for me. But as I look at these things, then I see that this is what he is in himself. Then is manifested in his love and his rich relationship with us. So we have then this love of God, and he says, we're sure that there is nothing that could attract the love of one as holy and as just as thou art. Yet thou hast declared thine unchanging love for us in Christ Jesus. And this is a critical point. He tells it, he puts it this way. If nothing in us can win thy love, then nothing in the universe can prevent thee from loving us. One way I put it is there's nothing you can do that will make God love you more. And there's nothing you can do that will make him love you less. We get these crazy ideas about God, these distorted images from the false images that are picked up in this world of imperfection, so that we have to transmute and change and to elevate our vision of what true parenting is, what a true father is, and often be reparented by having a better vision of the true father heart of God. So he says that thy love is uncaused and undeserved. And as I put it, it's causeless, ceaseless, measureless. Romans 5. God's love is causeless, it's measureless, and it's ceaseless. So you can rest in that. And then he says, thou art thyself the reason for the love with which we are loved. It is not something that is excited about our greatness or our worthiness, but rather he looks upon that which is unworthy. But because we bear his image, he cherishes that. And he gives us the dignity of participation, of agent causality. He gives us the dignity of accomplishing something in this world that will last forever. Because you and I, were we not wired for significance, wired for security, and wired for satisfaction? You can't help it. In your heart of hearts, you want to find security. We're wired that way. But as you well know, we often look to the wrong places for that. We want to find significance, but it's not going to be found in your possessions. You want to find a sense of satisfaction, but it won't be in your performance. It'll be something richer than that. It's when he himself says, I'm going to give you these things that you couldn't find on the earth. You must look to me. So your significance is found in that you are a child that I've adopted you into my family. I mean, your security is that, and that you are part of the body of Christ, and that Christ is now in you, and so you are truly have a sense of true significance. You're part of something that's going to go on forever. And this significance really is the answer is how significant is it? It's the answer is how long is it going to last? So what does it matter 1,000 years? Remember the 1,000-year perspective I'm always inviting you to pursue? What difference will this ill thing that I perceive as an ill thing is actually going to last and actually it make? And so the mindset then is that we recognize that this is something that God's called us that's going to last forever. And so he's given us the Holy Spirit as well. And he's given us, empowering us to actually accomplish something that will last forever as well. So he gives us this desire, but it's in him. So I truly love his prayers. In fact, it reminds me of something that's kind of interesting. If I go to the store, and then I have DVDs here, and I have these 8 DVDs. One of them you might find to be interesting is this one. There's the Prayers of Aw Tozer. So there's a DVD right now where you could actually hear, and there's music and there's imagery. And I set the prayers from the Pursuit of God and also from this book. And turn it into something that becomes a worship experience. So now let's continue on. The word God is love means that love is an essential attribute of God. And the mistake would be people say that love is God. No, God is love, but it doesn't mean love is God. It's much richer than that. We see there's this constant proclivity to pursuing something impersonal in our culture, and it seems that some it relationship becomes more dominant. That's why this whole AI mindset, this digital thing, so it is with God as well, that we almost make him impersonal and an impersonal force. No, he is what makes love. He's what makes personality. He is the ultimate. And his mind, his will, his emotions make ours like vacuums in comparison. Lewis put it, he's beyond personality, in the sense that his personality is so vastly greater than ours that we are thin, almost a thin gruel. But you will have faces until we have faces. And God will give you a name, and he's going to give you an identity, and he's going to thicken you, as Lewis describes it in the imagery there in The Great Divorce. You want to be thickened. We're right now like wraith life, but wait till you see what you'll be like. And so this love of God intends the good for us, you see, and it's part of what he wants for us. Now, he makes this point. From God's other known attributes, we may learn much about his love. So because God is self-existent, his love has no beginning. Because he's eternal, his love can have no end. Because he's infinite, it has no limit. Because he's holy, it's the quintessence of all spotless purity. Because he's immense, his love is incomprehensibly vast, bottomless, shoreless sea before which we kneel in joyful silence, and from which the loftiest eloquence retreats confused and abashed. And once again, then, I go back to this exercise that I like to do, where I may take his love and can compare that love. Let me undo that. If I want to compare his love then, and I can see how does the wisdom of God It's the wisdom, you see. So you can take that love and you can connect it with all the other attributes. This becomes an exercise for you. I believe we sent this to you, didn't we? Yes, Louis?
No, you were going through Tozer's text. Sonnet 116 was resonating.
Yes, yes.
It's an
yeah.
ever-fixed mark.
Yeah, that looks on tempests and is never shaken.
It's never shaken.
Yeah, it is a star to every wandering bark, whose worth unknown, although his height be taken. So exactly so.
I mean, I think Shakespeare and Tozer had the same source material.
I would say so. Yeah. I would say that's about right. Yeah. Now that's an interesting thought. Imagine right now Shakespeare and Tozer having a conversation. Now imagine you listening in. No, participating in. Because it's not going to be that they're so great in comparison. I'm nobody. No, you will see that you are you have a seat at that table. And you too will be able to participate. Imagine, so think about 2 or 3 people you'd love to be with. Have a conversation. So it shall be. Which is a lovely thought, because in the Father's house, there will be all these wonders and connections and collections. So Tozer's wisely doing this. He's comparing the love of God, and it's an eternal love, you see. It is a love of, it's always with us. It's full, it's boundless in its power, boundless in its rich architecture, because God is the architect of all beauty, you see. He's a gardener, so it's kind of like connecting. Would you connect love and gardening? So creative connections can be made with that as well. And so Tozer, I think, has the right instinct on that one. Just another thing I wanted to say, that he mentions love in terms of 5 categories. The first one, goodwill. So he thinks of the love of God in terms of benevolence. Remember, benevolence, benevolens, means goodwill. And so God's will for you is always for your good, always for your highest good. And so his idea is, if you understand that, if you don't understand it, fear is inevitable. And your attempt to conquer fear without removing the causes is futile. In other words, if you are just hoping for the best and you do not grasp that eternal sovereign love of God, that the love of God is such that at the end of the day, yes, we may be injured, we may be persecuted, we may die. As Peter says, don't be surprised at the fiery ordeal among you which comes upon you for your testing, as though some strange thing were happening to you. You're seeing it coming. It's right on the doorstep. But you also know that really nothing can harm you. Not at the end of the day. Even the pain of martyrdom will be transmuted by a great glory that is disproportionately rich in comparison. And that is a way. Nothing can harm you. Because why? Because God is love. His love is he's not only love, but he's sovereign. He says as well, not only that he has consistent love for you. Remember, agape tells us that love always seeks the highest good in the one who is the beloved. Always. So it's a steady intention of your will, remember, to another's highest good. And the best thing you can have is a friend who always has your best interests at heart. They may make mistakes. They may do foolish things, but at the end, their desire was your best interests. There's not a deceitfulness there. And God knows we need that consistency. It's a friendly love as well. And it's interesting that only one person was called a friend of God in the Hebrew Bible. Who was it? Abraham. Now he says, but I no longer call you servants or slaves, I call you friends. So we've been given that dignity of being called friends of God. It's an emotional identification. This is a very strange idea of acts of self-sacrifice are common to love. And here's what Tozer says about this. He has allowed his heart to be emotionally identified with men. Now, I can't comprehend that, you see. There's a doctrine of divine passivity whereby basically he's not really has emotions. I disagree. Now, we might claim that those are anthropomorphic, but I do believe that God has wedded his joy to us in some way I can't even begin to imagine. And that gives you great dignity. We know this. This is no trivial matter, that he was underwriting your folly and foolishness and did it with the blood of his own son. Don't take that lightly. This is not passivity. That God is intimately involved, and God so loved the world that what did he do? He gave. Love gives, and that's his point here. That it takes pleasure in its object. So God takes pleasure in you. And he mentions Psalm 104 where God takes pleasure. If we had time, we'd look at that. But he takes pleasure in his creation, in his created order, and he takes pleasure in us as well. He takes delight in us. And this is a rich thought. And he speaks about how, using Zephaniah 3:17, the Lord thy God is in the midst of thee is mighty. He will save, he will rejoice over thee with joy. He will rest in his love. He will joy over thee with singing. So it's almost the image of him singing over a child, you see. That is him as well. So that we have both masculine and feminine imagery of God, because you see male and female come together are required to constitute the image of God. He transcends our categories. And he speaks about how God spoke it into being. He sung it into being. It's intriguing if you read the Silmarillion by Tolkien, and the whole idea of it was sung into being. And then Lewis's, the last battle in his Narniad, he too speaks about how Aslan sung the cosmos, the world into being, Narnia into being. It's wonderful stuff. So they have this intuition that God is a musician as well. And then finally he says he must ever give to his own. He's going to constantly give. God does not love populations. Important point. He loves people. Jesus didn't die for humanity. He died for people, individuals. So in this mystery, we have the fact that the individual is dignified. We're not a part of just a lost in a collective. On the other hand, though, the collective, the body of Christ, but it's not a collective, it's a community, you see. It's a covenantal body of believers. You have both unity and diversity that are both needful and celebrated, because actually God is one and the many. So it gives us the basis for the dignity of the individual, but also the collectivity of the whole. So this whole idea of God loving us in this way is so rich and powerful and beautiful that he wants what's best for us. You can see I'm not going to get to the holiness of God, but I'm still going to try to finish it next week. But true Christian joy, as he puts it here, is the heart's harmonious response to the Lord's song of love. So that's what he's saying. He's using the music of God. That's why it was interesting to me, again, where I never saw in the list of attributes music. But clearly, he is the ultimate musician. He's invented music, just as he invented all these other things. He's invented the whole idea of narrative. He's the ultimate narrator. He's the ultimate storyteller, is he not? He's the ultimate poet as well. And so it is. So I see him as the divine musician who sings to us in his love and actually does a lullaby, as it were, a berceuse. There's a beautiful piece by Chopin. That's a berceuse, which is basically a lullaby, singing a child to sleep. And it's a lovely picture and when I hear some of these things, I play that piece, and it makes me think of God singing over us with joy and anticipation of what his plans are for us, which are rich and powerful and beautiful. So he wants more for us than we would ask for ourselves. He gives us better than we would even dare ask. And that's where I'm saying that this is a powerful thing. And of course, the love of God is going to be, again, they're not conflictual. They are, as I call it, euconflictual. EU. What does that mean? The prefix means good, euthos. So I now see that these are not competing, but actually euconflictual, that they work together in a homeostatic union. And we already see that in this body, that your body is designed in such a way that there are forces, both for good, For example, again, I always use, as some of you have heard me mention this, the electrolyte system. It comes to my mind always. And in your body's electrolyte, the potassium and the sodium have to be modified, but they're not bad things. They're both good for you, but you need the right proportion. So there's a constant changing. Probably, I don't know, maybe 100 times a day, the body modifies that amount. So if you had a graph of it, it would look like this. If it was a straight line, you'd be dead. You need conflict, because there's no story without conflict that's interesting. And even here, there's a euconflictual, not a good thing that you have a synergy. Even now, we already know what euconflictual life is like. It's me and my wife, you and your wife. You're not the same person, thank God for that. And so you have two goods, and the truth is always in between you two. And so if you allow that to be a euconflictual rather than a disconflictual, which is not so great, instead celebrate the difference and then realize that the truth, the total will always be greater than the sum of the parts, because this is a mystery of marriage in which you're a triad. You're dyadic with your wife and a triad with Christ. So as I see this now, I welcome this, and that's why I'm inviting you to reflect on that email that you received, and just inviting you to consider meditating on this and chewing on it, and just taking any of these attributes and thinking about it. If you remember last week, we came up with the idea of actually zooming in on one of these attributes. So I'm actually working on a document right now, a friend of mine. I've asked her to come with this list of 42 and find scriptures for them. And then we'll get together and I'll find more. And then having done that, I'm going to turn it into a simple document and send it to you. And that document then would mean that you could take any one of these attributes. So suppose we took love today, and that's the one you're going to chew on. And you'll have a list of maybe 4 or 5 things that tease that out, or the eternity of God for another day. And I love the idea that Chuck was talking about from this book that you'd read about. What's the name of it again? There's something mind. What was it? The Confident Mind, where his idea was of going through portals as you go through a door. And I'm trying to train myself to do that. So every time you go through a door, as you came in here, it would be a little quick reminder to shoot up a thought about the eternity of God that day, you see? And then we go through, about 50 doors a day on average, probably? So that would be a very interesting exercise. You're not going to get it, but after a while, you keep trying to remember doors, and it's a reminder, after a while, you'll build a muscle memory there. So my desire would be that we begin to meditate on these attributes in creative ways. So in your session now, let's talk about the love of God, because that's all we talked about, and then we'll look at the implications of that and get back. We had a good discussion in our group together, and about excellence once again. And so this was one of the themes that we emphasized here. The idea of spiritual excellence. You've seen this before, but I can't stress this too much, though, the idea of the inside-out dynamic of life, that because so many people then try to do it outside in. But you see so many people who are theoretically and functionally excellent, but do not have the interior life to sustain that outward dynamic. So it is with this love of God, that it's something that empowers us from the interior, from the inside to the outside. So speaking about the love of God, what were your thoughts about this, or those various aspects of God's love that Tozer teased out in his book? Because as we saw, he described it in these 5 terms just by way of summary. He spoke of it in terms of goodwill. He always has your best interests at heart. And because he is sovereign, he can accomplish his purposes. He's not some anemic being. So what he promises, he's also able to complete. And then he says he's friendly, that you have a friendship with God, which is an astonishing thought. That he emotionally, in some way, meaningfully connects himself with our well-being. And that furthermore, he takes pleasure. He sings over his creation with joy. And then finally, he described it in terms of this idea he must ever give to his own. Love does not, God doesn't love populations, he loves people. And so the heart's harmonious response to the Lord's song of love. What did you, yes?
JC won't speak up, but I'll speak up.
JC won't speak up? Come on, JC, what's wrong with you?
He indicated that we as Christians need to be aware, not woke as current culture tells us,
Yeah.
but aware of the love of God.
Yes.
But you've also got to be aware of God's need for justice and his ability to exercise wrath.
Yes. Will not the judge of the earth, of all the earth, do that which is right? And so that's why it's so critical for us to see that they are not competing, but they actually cooperate. So in wrath, with the love of God, and one thing I neglected to mention, I think, was something that Tozer commented about this whole idea of wrath, and I think it was perhaps it may have been though over here. God's wrath. This is the next chapter, holiness. But he said, I want you to note this: God's wrath is his utter intolerance of whatever degrades and destroys. It's not a capricious wrath. It's a holy wrath. It's a loving wrath. It's a love. It's a jealous wrath because he's jealous for your well-being and hates anything that will distort it. And you know what that's like if you're a father with your children. You have a wrath against that which would diminish the life and vitality of the ones you love, you see. So it's an utter intolerance of whatever degrades and destroys. I thought that was a wonderful way of encapsulating that. Yeah. So, yeah. So any more thoughts on that, or was that, okay, good. Yes, yes.
Well, we're thinking without blemish perfect, his love is perfect.
Yes.
And one of the things that a lot of non-believers have a tough time with is if God loved me type of question. We're talking about the alcoholics, drug addicts we've known, where what they need is to hit bottom before they're going to turn their life around.
Yes.
And God is never going to promote or endorse our bad behavior. He's not going to get in the way of our spiritually hitting bottom so that we'll finally turn to him as a way out.
Yes.
So he can love us, and just like so many parents we know, we may be those who watch their child make self-destructive choices all the time, and you're brokenhearted, but you can't stop them from going down that path.
No.
So we need to have that same kind of love for folks. I'll help anybody get better. I'm not going to help you get worse.
That's correct. That's a good way. It's a great summary. And again, you bring to mind this imagery here and the parable of the prodigal son. And remember these qualities of the love of God, which are almost an astonishment, because over here, remember these things. He came to his senses, says, I'm going to go to my father's house. I'm not worthy. Then he has his little prepared speech. And remember these in verse 20. He got up and came to his father, and while he was still a long way, remember what the father heart of God he's looking for. He allowed the prodigal to go, and he had an experience. Instead of preventing that person, he permitted him to, even though he knew it was for their own self-destruction, because the only way he's going to find himself is by coming to the end of himself. And only then do you find him. And so the path down is the path up, you see. And he understood this. But still, you see this wonderful vision. Though he allowed this to happen, it took him probably a long time, if there was a good deal of wealth, to squander it. As the elder brother says, on prostitutes. He brings that particular detail into bear. The father did not. But the point is, he sees them and a long way off, which means every day he's looking for the son's return. And so it is with you. But their disobedience must not actually blackmail your joy. Never allow that wrongness in your children or your beloved ones to blackmail your joy. Because God is bigger than their disobedience. And if they are in that story, and our prayers for them is for, if they know Jesus, then ultimately there's going to be something. He will complete that which he's begun, even if it requires an immense pain that we bring upon ourselves. But so be it. But then he ran and embraced, he saw compassion. Nobody in the ancient Near East, no father would run. It would be beneath their dignity. He ran. So God stoops to conquer you. He stoops to woo you and draw you together and in the embrace of his love. And then having found you, he sings over you. He embraced him and kissed him. So it's a wonderful picture, isn't it? Yeah. And we have time for another. I think there was another. Yes, there you go.
You know, one thing I like to say, we were talking about relationships with dads, and some of us didn't have the best experiences there and stuff, and so sometimes it's hard to trust the father when you have that.
That's the problem, yeah.
And one thing that really helped me a year ago was reading a book by Dane Ortman called Gentle and Lowly, which has like 9,000 5-star ratings
Yeah,
on Amazon now.
yeah,
But his main theme of that book is the only time Christ ever talked about who he was. When he spoke about himself, he said, "Come to me, for I am gentle and lowly,
yeah.
and
I'll give you rest, yeah.
And I try to keep reminding myself of that.
That's a good word.
He isn't looking to be the dad I'm used to.
Yes.
Dad says, "I'm gentle and lowly."
Yeah, this is such a rich image, isn't it? The idea of I will give rest for your souls. God knows we need rest. We're weary and heavy laden. And he says, I'm going to put you and I'm going to yoke you to me. But that's an easy yoke, as you know, because the imagery there would be that the younger animal would be yoked to a powerful older animal, and the older animal would do the work, and the younger would just kind of follow. It was an easy yoke. And so this is let me put my service is your perfect freedom. Only the service of Jesus is your freedom. Everything else is a tyrannical taskmaster.